Hey everyone, my name is Iasmina and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm finally gonna make a video that I have been mentioning for a long time on this channel. Every time I mention some kind of writing book, I promised you that I was gonna make a video about the best writing craft books. And I'm finally doing it. As writers, we should continuously look to improve our craft, and writing books is one of the ways we can do this, as is of course just reading in general, reading anything you can get your hands on. But it's always super helpful to read books specifically on writing, whether that is advice, general inspiration from other writers, or actual practical lessons and practical prompts that you can actually do to improve your craft. So without further ado, here are my favorite writing craft books and what I think are probably the best writing craft books on the market right now. First one I'm going to start with is one that is actually more of a tool than a book that you read all the way through. And I'll show you what I mean. So this is one I've mentioned on this channel quite a few times now. This is the Emotion Thesaurus, A Writer's Guide to Character Expression by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. So this is a godsend. This is basically an encyclopedia of all emotions that exist. Well, okay, probably not all the emotions that exist, but the most common emotions that exist and the ones most commonly used in writing, and then ways to describe those emotions, whether by internal actions or external actions or the character's thoughts. This is so useful, you guys. If you're a writer and you have not picked this up, do it. Seriously, it will improve your writing so much. This one is pretty much a must-have in my opinion. The second book I'm going to talk about is actually one of my favorite books on writing, and it's part educational, part inspirational, and that is Stephen King's On Writing, a memoir of the craft. So this is half Stephen King's memoir of how he became a writer and all of the struggles that he went through, and then part actual advice book with a lot of practical examples as well. I devoured this when I first read it a few years now, and I know it's one of those books that I'll keep coming back to because there is so much valuable advice here. And also just reading about Stephen King and how he became a writer and all of the stuff that he went through was really inspiring and also kind of heartbreaking, because I don't know if you know his story, but it's not necessarily a very happy one. I guess it's one with a happy ending because he is probably the most known author in existence. Pretty sure everyone knows about Stephen King, whether they read or not, and he has so many books now, and his career is continuing on till this day. Anyone who considers themselves a writer should read this book, whether they like Stephen King or not. You don't have to like Stephen King or read Stephen King to read this. This was actually the first Stephen King I read. I have since read some of his actual novels, and I really do love his writing. But you know, you don't have to like Stephen King necessarily to enjoy this book. So this is also more on the inspirational side, so less about actual prompts and things like that, more on the sort of general get your ass into that chair and write kind of inspiration. So I would definitely recommend this. Also a really easy one to start with if you just want to kind of ease yourself into this whole writing craft thing. I think this is a good one. Next I have probably the smallest writing craft book there is, and that is The Elements of Style. This is a book on writing that has not changed since its publication, which was, I think, the 1920s? Let me just check real quick. In this it actually says that one of the first editions was in 1936, so still almost 100 years ago, almost. And in essence, this book has not changed since, and I think it's such a tiny book, you should really just pick it up and read it. All of this advice is still very relevant to this day, and it talks more about structure and word choices. So more straightforward advice on, for example, how to use commas, how to use pronouns, how to use colons and dashes, also not to overuse adverbs and things like that. So, you know, you're not gonna get a lot in this, but I do think it's quite essential that you do know these things that are in this book. And so if you want just a quick read that you can read in an hour, I suggest The Elements of Style. Now the next one I'm going to talk about is more aimed towards writers who want to traditionally publish, because it kind of looks at how to get an agent by telling you what you should and shouldn't do in your first 5 pages. So it is actually called The First 5 Pages, A Writer's Guide to Staying Out of the Rejection Pile by Noah Lukeman. However, even though it does focus on, you know, the things that you should and shouldn't do in the beginning of your book to catch that agent's attention, I think honestly any writer should read this, regardless of whether you want to traditional publish or not. Even if you want to self-publish, I still think the advice in this book is really, really valuable. And it really talks about openings. You know, openings are so important to catch your attention, whether that's an agent's attention, but it could just be a reader's attention who's picking up the book from a bookstore or reading the first pages on Amazon and deciding whether they want to continue reading or not. And I think the advice in this book, again, as I mentioned, is really relevant regardless of method of publication. The thing about this is that it manages to go through all of the major parts of really what a book should have, but kind of focusing in the first 5 pages, because if you don't have these things in your first 5 pages, and if you don't do these things right in your first 5 pages, then an agent will know that the rest of your book is not worth reading, and also a reader will know that the rest of your book is not worth reading. So it looks at dialogue, it looks at style, at pacing, at all of these things, but in the context of the first 5 pages. How many times have I said the first 5 pages? Anyway, yes. The next one is also a slim one, and it's also a more specific one. It focuses on a more specific aspect of writing, and that is How to Write Dazzling Dialogue, the Fastest Way to Improve Any Manuscript by James Scott Bell. As the title suggests, this is just focused on dialogue, and it gives examples of dialogue from famous books and what they did and did not do right, and it talks about what you should and should not do. I consider dialogue to be one of my strengths as an author, and so I didn't really feel like I needed to read this book per se, but I was just kind of more curious about, you know, what he had to say about it and whether I could find, you know, something new that I hadn't thought about or something that could really improve my dialogue to the next level. But I found that this book goes into a bit more detail, but it still rehashes the same issues and the same do's and don'ts of dialogue that a lot of the books that I'm going to talk about do in a bit less detail, but all of them cover basically all of what's in here. So I think if dialogue is something that you struggle with, then I highly would recommend it. But otherwise, if you already know how to write dialogue, or you think you know how to write dialogue pretty well, then I think, again, it's pretty much covered in all of these books one way or another. The next book is The Emotional Craft of Fiction, How to Write the Story Beneath the Surface by Donald Mass. Now this is actually one of my favorite books on writing that I've read, because it looks at writing in a very different way than any of the other books do. And that is how to evoke emotion in a reader, or how to write emotion in your writing so that a reader feels a certain way while they're reading your book. Yeah, and it just focuses on that and tries to teach you how to evoke those emotions, regardless of what kind of emotion you're trying to evoke. You know, it could be sadness, it could be happiness, it could be just making your reader feel for the character really, really strongly. And again, it shows examples from famous books and talks about, you know, how they achieved this and that, and how you can as well. So I would highly, highly recommend this one. The next book is actually about editing, not just writing in general, but specifically about editing and self-editing. So this is Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, How to Edit Yourself into Print by Rennie Brown and Dave King. So yeah, this kind of goes over how you can self-edit your book, and it goes over all of the methods, or some methods, on how you can do it yourself. And again, no matter if you plan on traditional publishing or self-publishing, you should always edit your book yourself at least a couple of times. And so getting something like this and trying to follow their guide on how to self-edit, I think is really helpful. If maybe you don't know what you're doing the first time, but even if you do, like I purchased this after I've self-edited my book quite a few times, but I still found some really useful stuff in there. On a similar vein to the last one, this one is about outlining, and that is Outlining Your Novel, Map Your Way to Success by K.M. Wieland. So yeah, it talks about outlining your novel, and again, it's one way to go about it. It's not the only way. If you're a little lost on how to do that, or if you just want to try a different method, I'd recommend checking this out and following the guide. The same author also wrote a workbook on outlining your novel, so this is more of a guide, and then there's also a workbook that you can actually scribble in and stuff if you need something like that. Okay, now the next book I'm going to talk about is not one that I actually have physically, because I read it as a Kindle book, and I think it's only available as a Kindle book correct me if I'm wrong, but this is 2K to 10K, Writing Faster, Writing Better, and Writing More of What You Love by Rachel Aaron. So this was actually one of the most inspirational books on writing I ever read. It's quite a short read, so you can read it really quickly. It definitely was one that motivated me so much to just write, you know, to stop complaining, stop thinking about all of this nonsense, and just go at my desk and start writing. So if you're feeling a little uninspired, or if you're feeling like you're a bit sluggish, like you don't write as much as you would like to every day, read this book. She has some awesome advice on how to get rid of all that nonsense in your head and just write down those words. As the title suggests, you know, writing from 2,000 words to 10,000 words a day. You don't have to write 10,000 words a day, but just in general, if you want a little bit of a push to write more, then I'd really recommend this. The next book is one I have also already mentioned quite a bit on my channel, and that is Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting that you'll ever need by Blake Snyder. And as I've mentioned, although it says it's a book on screenwriting, this can be used by anyone writing any kind of story in any kind of format. So it doesn't have to be a script. It works just as well for novels, and it works just as well for short stories or for anything. And this is the book that has the 15 beat sheet method of outlining in it, the one that I've successfully used, the one that I've made a video about. I will put that video up here and I'll link it in the description if you're interested in how I outlined my latest novel. Again, it's not the only way you can outline, but it's one that has helped me, and I think it's a method that is very easy to pick up and try and see if it works for you. And that's one of the things that this book introduces and talks about, but it's a lot more than that. It again goes through some famous movie scripts and how they've achieved certain things and how you can do it. And it's very readable, this one as well. And I think it was also a really enjoyable read on its own. So highly recommend this one. Next one is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Lamott. Some instructions on writing and life. So this, as the title kind of suggests, talks about writing a lot, but it's also more similar in vein to Stephen King's On Writing. So it's a lot more about the writer life, how it's like to be a writer, and about the author's experiences in writing, and kind of part memoir in the same vein as Stephen King's On Writing. This is less kind of factual advice and prompts, but more inspirational advice. This is actually one of the most popular books on writing, I think, that there are. And for good reason. I think it is very good. Okay, and unintentionally I actually left one of my favorite books on writing for last. Actually, I think On Writing by Stephen King and then this one are my favorites. So this is John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, 22 Steps to Becoming a Master Storyteller. But unlike the title suggests, it's more than just the 22 steps to becoming a master storyteller. This book was awesome. Also taught writing in a way that is actually very different than most books on writing that I've read. And I think if you were to pick up any book on the craft of writing, I think you should read either this one or Stephen King's On Writing if you want something a little more readable, you know, as a non-fiction book as well. This, unlike a lot of the other books, kind of looks at how to construct a story based more on what the characters would do rather than what you should do as an author and how you should plot the book the way you want it to turn out, if that makes sense. Kind of teaches you how to find the natural flow of the story that comes from the characters that you're writing about and the writing itself and the atmosphere and the themes, instead of what you as an author are kind of trying to achieve, if that makes sense, because sometimes us as authors, we're wrong. Sometimes we want the characters to do something, but that's not actually what the characters would do, but we force them to do it anyway, and then it feels unnatural and it feels fake. And this kind of tries to look at how you should not do that and listen to your characters instead and listen to the flow of your story. And this actually is almost against the 3-act structure, you know, where you have to have Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, and it's very methodical and it's very much samey. A lot of these other books actually talk about the 3-act structure a lot, and I'm not saying that the 3-act structure is bad or good. You can do anything you want, but this is just kind of different in that way that it kind of tries to steer you away from that and tries to steer you to a more natural flow of the novel instead. Stop rambling now. I really enjoyed this book and I would definitely recommend it. So yeah, this is my stack of writing craft books that I've read so far. Please let me know if you've read others that you really liked that I have not mentioned and that you think I might enjoy. As always, I will leave links in the description to all of these books through Book Depository. They give free international shipping and it's where I buy all of my books from. So I highly recommend Book Depository, but just to make it easier for you to find these books if you're interested, I'll leave them in the description below. But that's it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe, like, and comment down below if you like this video and if you'd like to see more of the same in the future from me. And I'll see you next Monday. Bye!